And we can start.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation of our scientific study on optimal control policies to address the pandemic health economy dilemma. My name is Dominik Fischer from the University of Magdeburg, and with me are Thomas Seidelmann, also from the University of Magdeburg, and Rohit Salgotra from the Tel Aviv University. Well, in simple terms, what we try to find are strategies to control pandemic's course by also respecting the stable healthcare system and a stable economy. Before we start, I want to show today's outline. So we start with some more background information on the health economy dilemma in the case of a pandemic, before we propose our model and the objectives. Then we explain how we use multi-objective optimization to solve this problem and present our experiments and simulation results. In the end, we discuss the strategies which we discovered before we conclude. Well, yeah, the health economy dilemma is well discussed in literature, and during a pandemic, you have this dilemma because in a pandemic where you have no vaccination or nearly no treatment, non-pharmaceutical interventions are the only measures you can take in place. Non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs, are measures like social distancing or business shutdowns. However, such measures are shocking the social and economic behavior a lot, and policies or decision makers try to avoid them when possible. We argue that multi-objective optimization algorithms can find trade-offs between containing the pandemic and maintaining a stable economy. This is also discussed in community, for example, by Yousefpour et al. Or Miralles et al. Our contribution to this discussion is by extending the basic SEIR model to model this health economy dilemma by using multi-objective evolutionary algorithms to find strategies for this problem, or like optimizing policies, and by identifying optimal strategies for the decision makers, and maybe strategies which are more focused on the health aspect, more on the economy aspect, or true trade-off strategies. I give over the word to Thomas, who will explain the model now.
Thank you, Dominik. Yeah, so essentially, as Dominik has already said, in terms of on the side of the pandemic, what we have done is we have created an extended SEIR model. This type of model is fairly typical for modeling pandemics. It is essentially a set of differential equations which combines multiple compartments with each other, or which interlinks them. So in the basic SEIR model, actually the compartments which we have correspond to the name of that model. So we have the S compartment, which you can also see on the top right of the screen right now, and the E compartment, I and R. And the S one stands for the susceptible people, so meaning the ones which can still get an infection and which are currently healthy. Then there are the exposed people who got the infection but are not yet infectious themselves. So the virus is in the incubation phase then. We got the I people, the infected ones, who can spread the virus further. And we get the recovered compartment in which the people have immunity from the virus. And after some time, this immunity can also be lost again, bringing the people from the R compartment back to the S compartment. Now, in the model that we have created, we have expanded upon this by also introducing quarantine compartments. So for the susceptible individuals exposed and for the infected individuals, we now have these quarantine compartments. And we have also integrated an economic aspect, an economic compartment to the model, which we don't see on this slide, but we will see the effects of that in the results section. But we have also highlighted here that some of these compartments, in particular the ones in quarantine and the infected ones, have a negative impact on the GDP, so on the economy that we have modeled. And another aspect that we have integrated into this model are the policies themselves. And Dominic, would you please go to the next slide? Yes, so the policies that we use in this model are essentially modeled by Bezier curves, and the curve themselves, the curves have always a similar shape, and it is seen here on the screen. However, what we can change on the curves and which differs between the policies that we are using is the phases of that policy, how long they are and how pronounced. So for example, in the beginning of the Bezier curve, we can see we have this build-up phase, then we have the peak, and in the end, we have the fade. And this models the influence of the control policy over time. And further, what the policies are doing is they are modifying a certain parameter of our model. And if you go to the next slide once again, yeah, here we can see the two policies which we are actually using for this paper. One of them is social distancing, and we can see the graph, how that would look like plotted on the right, the influence graph of that policy. And the social distancing is reducing the contact rate in our model, and thereby reducing the amount of the virus spreading. And on the bottom, we have the lockdown policy, which is increasing the preventive quarantine rate. So sending people to quarantine just to make sure that they can't actually get infected. And what we are optimizing in our model is not the policies themselves. They are fixed in the shape that we have seen here at the top. But what we are optimizing is when we are actually when we are employing these policies. Should we employ them early? Should we employ them late? Both at the same time, or should one come before the other? These are essentially the questions that we are looking at and that we want to optimize for now. Yeah, and from here on, I give to Rohit for going over the multi-objective optimization problem.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for handing me the slides. About the multi-objective optimization problem that we are dealing with here is basically because in a pandemic scenario, in our scenario, we are dealing with two parts. That one is the health objective, which is basically the pandemic course, and the other is the economic objective. The health objective is basically dealing with reducing the number of infections, and the economic objective is to minimize the damage on the GDP. So in order to deal with that, we need to define something. We need to define a bi-objective problems. And for that, we are using multi-objective optimization algorithms. Why multi-objective optimization algorithms is a good question, because for these algorithms are basically used to optimize solutions that can be where the number of solutions we require are actually conflicting, where the objectives are actually conflicting. So in present scenario, when we are dealing with health and economy simultaneously, if we are going to have a better health, have a minimum number of infections, then obviously we need to impose lockdowns and social distancing. In that case, the economy will go down. But on the other scenario, if we want to have a good economy, we need to keep the economy going and reduce the number of reduce the lockdowns and all. So there should be something which is actually a trade-off between both health as well as economic objective. So in that case, we are using the multi-objective optimization algorithm by defining it as a two-objective problem. We are using the problem as a min-max problem, which is basically minimization of two objective functions. That is function one, which is given by reducing the maximum number of infections for health objective and minimizing the damage for economic objective. Can you go to the next slide? So this can be better understood from the fact that in a multi-objective optimization problem, we have two type of spaces. One is the decision space where we actually have the solutions, and other is the Pareto front, which is basically the front which corresponds to those solutions. So as you see on the top left side on the decision space, you can find that there is a particular set of solution which is available, and And on the objective space, we have the Pareto optimal solutions corresponding to that decision objective. This can be better understood from the fact that the equations that the pandemic and economic policy model, which is shown in the center of the both decision and objective space, gives the actual front where we are actually working on this multi-objective optimization problem. Maybe next slide. Next. Yeah, so why actually we are using these multi-objective problems now? The multi-objective algorithms is basically the core of this thing, because traditional algorithms were also being used to such as weighted sum, boundary intersection, and epsilon constraint method were also being used to optimize solution, to find new solution. But it was very difficult for that for them to set the weight vectors to find Pareto optimal solutions, which are actually a trade-off between both two different conflicting objectives. So it was very difficult for those algorithms to solve. Then we require maximum number of the values, the knowledge of maximum and minimum objective values for these algorithms. Apart from that, they require a lot number of runs to simulate the algorithm and finally find new solutions. Apart from that, the modern multi-objective algorithms, which are basically NSGA2 and NSGA3, I'll explain them in the next slide. And these algorithms are basically simple and robust and can be extended to any type of objective space, from single objective to multi-objective, then many objective, and then for multi-criteria decision making and others. So these can operate on a large set of objective spaces. Apart from that, these are simple and operate on a single set of solution. Operate on a set of candidate solutions. So we have a different defined population size, and then we work on that population. And also a single run is sufficient enough to find an optimal solution. Next slide, maybe. Next slide, Dominic. Thank you so much. So based on these, we have used 4 algorithms. That is NSGA2, non-dominated sorting based genetic algorithm, and NSGA3, which is the same but an extended version of NSGA2. Then multi-objective evolutionary algorithm based upon decomposition, and finally the multi-objective particle swarm optimization algorithm to simulate our experiments. Based on that, we are using the PLAT EMO framework, and the total number of simulations the following is 4,000 with the total number of answers 36 and the number of individuals. A time span of 300 days is taken roughly, and the lower and the upper bound for this kind of problem, by objective problem, is taken to be 0 and 100 respectively. Apart from that, the basic parameters of NSGA2 and NSGA3 are a crossover and mutation rate, which are uniformly distributed in the range of 0 and 1. For MOPSO, there are 3 parameters. One is the initial inertia weight, which is usually taken to be 1. Then cognitive learning factor, which is basically the exploration phase, and the social learning factor, which is exploitation operation. We are using a value of 2 for both of these. The final algorithm is the multi-objective evolutionary algorithm based upon decomposition, and it only has 1 parameter, which is the weight vector, and the value is taken to be 1. This corresponds to the setup for the multi-objective optimization part. Apart from that, if you want to have a look at the model parameters, the SEIR model, the economic model, the fixed economic, the policy parameters, and the optimization parameters, you can have a look at the right side of the slide in the table by pausing it. I think that's it, and I'll hand over the slides to Thomas now.
Yes, thank you, Rohit. So now we come to the actual results of our model and the simulations that we have done. So here on this slide, we can see the baseline scenario when we just consider the influence of the pandemic, and we do not employ any kind of policy to fight the pandemic. Essentially what we can see here in the graphs, and at this point I want to highlight especially the black dashed line, which corresponds to the economic compartment, which is like a comparatively simple indicator for the health of the economy, and the yellow, green, and light blue graphs, which correspond to the number of infected people. And essentially what this simulation shows for the baseline is that we get a single and pretty large wave of infected people, with about 54% of people being infected concurrently, which is a lot. And on the economic side of things, we get a comparatively small decline, but overall it recovers pretty quickly once the infections are done, and then we have pretty good economy here. Yeah, next slide, please. And what we have then done is we have then used the multi-objective optimization approaches, which we have heard about before, in order to find optimal strategies in terms of when to actually issue, when to trigger the two policies that we have, social distancing and lockdown. Here on this slide, we can see the Pareto set on the left and the Pareto front on the right. The Pareto set corresponds to the trigger times that we have found and that we have identified to be optimal. And we can see it's a very distinct L shape, which makes sense when you think about it, because the first wave of the pandemic happens fairly early, and having a strategy on the top right here would mean that you would issue the social distancing and the lockdown both very late, probably after the first wave is already over. But in that case, they are not very helpful anymore because all the action has already been done, essentially. So at least one of those policies is generally always issued fairly early, and either both of them actually, or one is issued early and the other one later. Yeah, and on the right, we can see the objective values corresponding to that set of strategies that we have found. But I think we should just go over the actual results here. And we can see the strategy A is to minimize the impact on the health objective. And we can see on the top right where this corresponds to the solution on the Pareto front. In this case, we have an early lockdown and comparatively late social distancing. We get 2 waves of infections, which is, by the way, something which is common to all the advanced strategies here. Essentially, we are deferring the state of herd immunity to later by issuing policies early. And in this case, we can see that we have a greatly improved health objective with only 26.5% of individuals infected concurrently. But we can also see the trade-off of this is that the economy is really bad, and we have a long and pretty steep decline in the economy until finally, once everything stabilizes, it rises again. Next one. And here's strategy B, where we focus on the economy. So this is obviously different from before now. And actually the trigger times are also switched. So the lockdown is issued late and the social distancing is issued early. It's still better in terms of health, interestingly, than the baseline scenario where we did nothing at all, with 42% of individuals infected concurrently, but still bad, of course. And for the economy objective, we are as optimal as with the objective the way we have defined it we can be, meaning that there is no decline in the GDP compared to the starting point at 0, which is optimal. Okay, next one. And strategy C here is a trade-off strategy where we try and essentially find a solution which is in between the two from before. And as we can see from the values, this has also worked out. So lockdown and social distancing in this case are both issued fairly early. And we have 33% of the individuals infected concurrently at the peak of the pandemic. And the GDP does have a pronounced decline, and also actually a small second decline in the second wave. But they are not as bad as in the strategy, which is only focusing on the health objective. So I would say we have found a reasonable trade-off here. Okay, and this is it so far from the results. And I would hand over to Dominic for the conclusion.
All right, thank you guys for presenting our work. I will conclude and finish the presentation with this slide. To sum up everything, we showed that NPI impact the economy and also the health side, but prevent virus spreading. And we use bio-objective optimization and multi-objective evolutionary algorithms to deal with this problem. Of course, there is much future work to do. For example, we try to refine compartments, objectives, and policies. However, with our work, we already can show that ideas on NPIs also hold in our simulation, and that probably herd immunity is the only goal which can be reached without proper treatments or vaccination. Yeah, thank you for your attention, and we are looking forward for the live session to answer your questions on this work.